mess up the client's name, like mispronouncing it. It can throw things off. But the good news is our experts actually have some phrases you can use to, turn that awkward moment into something kind of charming.
Okay, so we've nailed the welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do we start talking about, our services, but in a way that actually makes the client, sit up and listen?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting because instead of just launching into like a product pitch, some of these top salespeople, they actually use a technique where they turn the whole presentation into a consultation.
How do they do that?
Well, one tech executive, he starts by asking this kind of thought-provoking question. He says something like, "What keeps you up at night when it comes to your business?" And that immediately shifts the focus to the client's needs, and you're suddenly positioned as like a problem solver.
That's brilliant. I can see how that would make the client feel like you're on their side, not just, trying to push a product.
Exactly. And once they start talking about their pain points, then you can kind of naturally weave in your services as, possible solutions.
Okay, so it's not about the hard sell. It's about building that rapport first and having an actual conversation.
Absolutely. And another point they emphasize is that transition from small talk to business, because you don't want to be, too abrupt, but you also don't want to waste time. So they have this thing called the two-exchange rule.
I like rules. What's the two-exchange rule?
Basically, you have like 2 brief exchanges of small talk before you steer the conversation to, the actual agenda.
Got it. That makes sense. You find that sweet spot between, being personable and being efficient.
Right. And even something as small as how you introduce your team can have an impact. Like one of the sales directors we read about, he suggests introducing team members by highlighting like how their expertise is relevant to the client, not just, stating their job titles.
So instead of saying, "This is Sarah from marketing," you might say, "This is Sarah, our social media guru who's helped companies just like yours boost engagement by, 200%.
Yeah, exactly. You're instantly showing the client, how your team can actually help them achieve their specific goals.
It's all about framing.
It is.
Okay, so we've welcomed the client, we've transitioned smoothly into business, we've introduced the A-team. What's next?
Now we really get to showcase the value you bring by, presenting the benefits of your services.
Right, but there's an art to this. Right? You don't want to just list off features and expect the client to be impressed.
Exactly. One source had this great anecdote about 2 software companies pitching to the same client. One was all about features, features, features. The other one focused on how their features would solve the client's very specific problems.
And I'm guessing the benefits company won the deal.
You got it. Features are fine, but clients ultimately buy outcomes right. They want to know how your service will make their life easier or their business more profitable or, just solve their problems.
So how do you actually do this in the meeting? How do you take those benefits and really make them hit home?
Well, one of the most powerful techniques is to start with a phrase like this, based on what you've shared about your challenges, because then it directly connects what they need to what you offer.
Yeah, that's so simple, but it shows you're listening. You get it. You're not just there to, pitch something you haven't even thought about.
Right. And then another tip they give is to actually let the client choose the order you explain things in. Like instead of just dumping all the benefits on them, you can say something like, would you prefer to start with, cost savings or increased efficiency or maybe enhanced security?
Oh, that's smart. Giving them choices makes them feel like they're, in control, like you're really partnering with them.
Exactly. And this is especially important with all the virtual meetings happening these days. There's this whole thing about reading the Zoom.
Ooh, reading the Zoom. I've heard that phrase, but how do you actually do it well?
Well, it's about paying attention to those little cues you might miss in person, like microexpressions or tone of voice. So if you see, a little frown when you mention a particular benefit, you can dig a little deeper, see if there's a concern.
It's like having a secret window into what they're really thinking.
It can be. On the flip side, if their eyes light up when you say something, then, you've hit on something that really resonates.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You're constantly adapting your approach based on these tiny little reactions.
Yeah, it's like a dance. You're adjusting your steps to match your partner.
I love that analogy. Now, you mentioned something about future pacing earlier, which I've always thought was a really powerful technique.
Yeah.
How do you use that in a client meeting?
Well, it's about helping them really visualize how their world will be better once they've implemented your solution. So you're not just saying, our software will save you time. You're painting a picture, right?
So instead of our software streamlines your workflow, it's imagine having an extra hour every day to focus on strategic goals instead of being bogged down in admin tasks.
Exactly. You're tapping into their emotions and helping them see those tangible benefits of working with you.
That's what it's all about. Making that emotional connection and showing them you understand their needs, their goals.
Right. And of course, in today's business world, you're often dealing with clients from different cultures, right? And those subtle differences in etiquette, they can make or break a meeting.
Oh, I know. I've been in situations where I'm like, what's the right thing to do here?
Mhm.
Especially with greetings and titles.
Absolutely. Cultural awareness is crucial. And our sources had some great insights on this. Like, there was this American executive who just totally won over his potential partners in East Asia simply by acknowledging how important relationships are in their culture. He didn't jump right into business. He took the time to build that connection first.
Yeah, that shows how important it is to be sensitive to those cultural differences. But what about those times when you genuinely don't know the right protocol? Like it can feel like a minefield sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. One expert had this great tip. Instead of guessing and maybe making a mistake, they said, just ask the client, what kind of greeting would be most appropriate in your culture?
That's so smart. It shows you're humble, you're willing to learn, and you respect their norms.
Right. And they had a similar suggestion for titles. Instead of assuming, you can just say, how would you prefer to be addressed? It's always better to be safe than sorry.
Right. It's all about making the client feel comfortable and respected.
Yeah.
That's key in any business interaction.
Absolutely. And another thing that came up about cultural differences that might surprise you? Sometimes silence can be your best friend.
Oh, really? I always thought silence in a meeting was like awkward, and you need to fill it with chatter.
Well, in some cultures, pausing before responding is actually a sign of respect. It shows you're really considering what the other person said.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. It's so easy to misinterpret these things if you're not aware of the cultural context.
Right. It's about being mindful.
Okay, so we've talked about the welcome, the art of presenting benefits, and the importance of cultural awareness. But there's one more element of a client meeting that can make or break that first impression, and that's questions.
Ooh, yeah, questions. They can be intimidating, especially in those, high-stakes meetings. But they can also be a chance to really shine.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
I usually dread questions because I feel like I'm being put on the spot. But you're right, they can be opportunities to show your expertise and, build credibility.
And the sources had some really interesting advice on how to handle those questions, like a pro. Like one story that stood out was about this junior executive. She was faced with this really tough question from a senior client.
Oh, man. I can only imagine how nerve-wracking that must have been. So what did she do?
Well, instead of panicking or, trying to answer immediately, she took a beat to clarify what the client was really asking. She said something like, to make sure I answer your question fully, could you tell me a bit more about what aspect of topic is most important to you right now?
That's brilliant. She bought herself some time to think. And she also made sure she was addressing the client's specific concern. It shows she's, thoughtful and thorough and focused on providing real value.
Exactly. And it highlights how important those first 10 seconds after a question are.
How so?
Well, those first few seconds really set the tone for your response. You don't want to jump in too fast, but you also don't want to hesitate for too long. It's finding that balance.
So it's not just about what you say, it's how you say it. The whole impression you give off.
Absolutely. You want to project that confidence and competence even if you're, feeling a little flustered inside.
Makes sense. Now, what about those times when you just don't know the answer? We've all been there. It can be so embarrassing.
Oh, tell me about it. But the good news is our experts have a strategy for this. And it all starts with acknowledging that you don't have the answer right off the bat.
Wait, so you're saying it's okay to admit you don't know something?
In fact, it's often the best thing to do. Instead of trying to bluff your way through, you can just honestly say something like, that's a great question. And to give you the most accurate information, I'd like to consult with our specialist team on that specific point. Would you mind if I include it in our follow-up materials?
Wow, that's a relief. I always feel like I need to have all the answers. It's so stressful, but your approach is so much more, honest and professional.
Right. You're showing them you're not afraid to admit when you don't know something, and that you're willing to go the extra mile to get them the right information.
I love that. Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about questions revealing the client's, underlying concerns. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Sometimes a question might seem straightforward, but there's a deeper concern behind it. So, for example, if they ask a lot about implementation timelines, they might actually be worried about potential disruptions to their business during the transition.
So it's not just about answering the question literally, it's about addressing that underlying worry as well.
Right. So you wouldn't just give them the date. You might say something like, Before we talk about the specific timeline, can I share how we've successfully managed similar transitions for organizations like yours, minimizing disruptions and ensuring a smooth rollout?
I like that. It shows you're thinking ahead, you get their concerns, and you have experience handling them.
It's about being proactive and building trust. You're not just there to sell them something, you're a partner who's invested in their success.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. The initial welcome, presenting benefits, cultural awareness, handling questions.
Yeah.
But there's one more big piece of the puzzle in today's world, and that's the digital dimension.
You're so right. Virtual meetings are the norm for many of us now. And they come with a whole new set of, challenges and opportunities when it comes to making a great first impression.
Well, I've had my fair share of awkward moments in virtual meetings.
Yeah.
From tech glitches to, background distractions. It can be tough to control the environment and maintain that professional image.
It takes practice. But luckily, our sources have some great advice for, mastering the art of the virtual meeting. And it all starts with your webcam.
Your webcam's like your handshake in the virtual world.
Exactly. It's how you make eye contact, connect with the client. But it's not just about turning it on. You have to think about how you're positioned to your body language.
Like I've heard, you shouldn't be looking down at the camera.
Yeah.
It makes you look less authoritative.
Right. You want to be at eye level or even slightly above. So you're looking directly at the client, just like you would in person. It conveys confidence.
Yeah, I've noticed that in meetings. When someone's looking down, it just feels different, less engaging.
Right. And the other thing is to remember to actually make eye contact. It's so easy to get distracted by your notes or whatever's on your screen, but eye contact is crucial for building that rapport, showing you're sincere and present.
So do you just stare into the camera the whole time?
No, not quite. You don't want to freak them out, but you do want to look at the camera frequently, especially when you're listening, asking questions, or conveying important information.
That's a good tip. Now, what about those other awkward virtual meeting moments, like the you're on mute situation?
Oh, we've all been there. But don't worry, our experts have some graceful ways to handle those without wanting to, disappear.
Okay, give me the magic word.
One of the simplest things is to just acknowledge it with a little humor. You could say something like, "Looks like I fell victim to the mute button again, but hey, at least we know the tech is working right."
Perfect. It's lighthearted. Breaks the tension. Shows you don't take yourself too seriously.
Exactly. It's about turning those awkward moments into, a chance to connect on a human level.
We are all human after all. Okay, so we've got webcam etiquette, the mute moment. Now, what about distractions?
Distractions, the joys of working from home. But there are ways to manage them and keep things professional. One of the best things you can do is just set expectations up front. Like at the beginning of the meeting, say something like, "Just so you know, I'm working from home today, so there might be some background noise. I'll do my best to keep things quiet on my end, and I appreciate your understanding if anything comes up."
That's a great tip. It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
And it lets the client know you're aware of the potential for distractions.
Right. It's about being transparent. Now, if something does happen, like, a dog barking or a kid needing something, don't panic. Acknowledge it briefly, and then refocus on the meeting.
So like, excuse me for a moment, my canine colleague is having a vocal opinion. I'll be right back.
Exactly. It's lighthearted, it shows you're human, and you can move on without derailing everything.
Okay. So we've got webcam etiquette, handling mute moments, managing distractions. What other virtual meeting tips do we have?
Well, one thing they emphasized is using visual aids effectively.
Oh, yeah. It's so easy to just, share your screen and click through slides, but that can get boring fast.
Right. You want to use visuals strategically. Keep the client engaged, help them understand your message.
So how do you do that?
Well, one technique is to mix it up. Don't just use slides. Bring in videos, images, diagrams, even interactive polls. Make it interesting.
That's a great idea. Keep things dynamic.
And if you are using slides, make sure they're visually appealing, easy to read, not too much text. No one wants to be bombarded with words.
Got it. Visual aids check. What else is essential for a good virtual meeting?
Time management. It's so easy for virtual meetings to drag on if you're not careful.
Oh, I know. It's easy to lose track of time.
One of the simplest things is to start with a clear agenda. Time limits for each topic.
So you might say something like, we've got an hour scheduled. I want to spend 20 minutes on X, 15 minutes on Y, and the rest for questions.
Exactly. It keeps everyone on track. And be mindful of your own time management, too.
What do you mean?
It's easy to get distracted by email or other tasks when you're in a virtual meeting, especially if you're not the one presenting. But it's important to stay focused, engaged throughout the meeting.
So treat a virtual meeting just like an in-person one. Be present, Be attentive. Be respectful of everyone's time.
Absolutely. Even though you're not physically in the same room, you can still build rapport, make connections, and leave a great impression.
I'm definitely feeling more confident about virtual meetings now.
Good. And remember, practice makes perfect. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
Okay, so we've covered so much in this deep dive so far.
Yeah.
The welcome, the art of presenting, benefits, the nuances of virtual meetings. What's next on our agenda?
Well, now that we've got the basics of making a great first impression, I think it's time to dive into some of the trickier parts of client meetings, like handling objections and those curveballs that inevitably come up.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's do it.
Yeah, because let's face it, even with the best preparation, sometimes things just don't go as planned. There might be objections, unexpected questions, maybe even a fire alarm.
Right, like that story we heard about the CEO who just calmly led everyone to safety during a fire alarm while continuing her presentation. Talk about grace under pressure.
It's a perfect example of how staying composed when things get chaotic can actually make you look even more impressive.
Okay, but not all of us are CEOs with, years of experience handling these high-pressure situations. What about the rest of us who maybe still get a little flustered when things go off script?
Well, the good news is our sources had some great advice on how to handle these curveballs with, grace and professionalism.
Yeah.
And one of the big takeaways is this: don't over-apologize.
Really, I always feel like I need to apologize like a million times when something goes wrong. Like if there's a tech issue or a scheduling mix-up.
It's a natural instinct. But apologizing too much can actually make you seem less confident, less in control. Instead, just acknowledge the situation briefly and then focus on, finding a solution or moving forward.
So like if my internet cuts out in the middle of a virtual meeting, instead of saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, my internet is terrible, please bear with me," I should just say, "It seems my internet connection is unstable. Let me reconnect quickly and we'll continue."
Exactly. It's concise, it's professional, and it shows you're taking charge.
Okay, I can do that. Now, what about other meeting emergencies? Like, what if you get a call you absolutely have to take?
Just excuse yourself politely, explain the situation briefly. You could say, "Excuse me for a moment, I need to take this urgent call. I'll be back as soon as possible."
Okay, makes sense. But what if it's a sensitive call and you don't want the client to overhear?
You can tweak it a bit. Say something like, "Excuse me, I need to step away for a brief private call. I'll be right back."
Got it. Those are helpful scripts.
Yeah.
Now, what about the unexpected guest? Like a colleague bursts into the room or your kid wanders in during a video call?
The joys of working from home. Again, just handle it gracefully and get back to the meeting. If it's a colleague, excuse the interruption, we'll be with you shortly. If it's a child, excuse me for a moment, my little one needs me, I'll be right back.
Okay, those are good. Now let's talk about objections, because those can be really tricky, especially when you're trying to make a good first impression.
They can, but objections are actually really valuable opportunities. You can understand the client's perspective, address their concerns.
Okay, so how do you actually turn an objection into a positive?
The most important thing is to really listen and acknowledge their concern. Don't get defensive. Don't jump in with the rebuttal. Instead, you could say, "I understand your concern about the objection. Let me explain how we address that."
That's a good approach.
Mhm.
It shows you're taking their concerns seriously.
Yeah.
You're actually interested in finding a solution that works for them.
Right. And once you've acknowledged their concern, then you can offer information, data, case studies, whatever is relevant to address that specific objection.
So for example, if a client is worried about the cost, you could say, "I understand budget is a key consideration. Here's how our services have delivered a strong ROI for other clients in your industry."
Exactly. You're giving them concrete evidence, showing the value you bring.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about those times when you genuinely don't have a good answer to their objection? Like they bring up a valid point you haven't considered before.
In those cases, it's okay to acknowledge that you need more time to think or to check with your team. You could say, "That's a great question, and I want to give you a complete and accurate answer. Would it be okay if I get back to you on that point after I've had a chance to consult with our experts?"
Oh, thank goodness. I always feel like I have to have all the answers right away. It's
Yeah.
so stressful. But your approach is much more realistic.
It's about being honest and transparent, showing that you're committed to giving them the best information, even if it takes a little longer.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about handling those unexpected moments and dealing with objections. Now let's shift gears and talk about how to wrap up a client meeting on a high note.
Yeah, the ending is just as important as the beginning. It's your last chance to make a good impression and, set the stage for what comes next.
So what are the key things to remember as you're wrapping things up?
Well, even if you're running short on time, don't rush the ending.
Right. Because it's so tempting to just say, "Okay, I think that covers everything. Thanks for your time. and bolt out the door.
Yeah.
But that makes the client feel like they were just, another item on your to-do list.
Exactly. You want to give them your full attention right to the very end. One of the best ways to do that is to summarize the key points from the meeting and reiterate the next steps.
So you might say, today we discussed key points. As a next step, I'll be action item, and I'll follow up with you by date to next step.
Exactly. It's clear it reinforces your commitment, and it leaves the client feeling confident and informed.
I like that. Now, what if you're not sure what the next steps should be? Like the client hasn't really said if you're interested in moving forward.
Then just ask. You could say something like, based on our conversation today, I'm confident we can help you achieve your goals. What are your thoughts on next steps?
Okay, I like that. It puts the ball in their court, but it also shows you're enthusiastic. You're ready to continue the conversation.
Right. Even if they're not ready to commit right then and there, it opens the door for future communication.
So we've got summarizing key takeaways, outlining next steps, and handling those situations where the next steps are a little unclear. What else is important for a good ending?
Don't forget to express gratitude. A simple thank you goes a long way.
You're right. It's easy to forget those basic courtesies, but they really do make a difference.
You could say, thank you for your time. I enjoyed our conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion.
Perfect. Now, what about that awkward moment at the very end when you're saying goodbye? I always feel like I stumble over my words.
I know what you mean. Our experts have tips for that too.
Yeah.
One thing is to just reiterate your enthusiasm for the project and your confidence in a successful outcome.
So I could say, I'm really excited about the possibilities we discussed, and I'm confident we can achieve great things together.
Exactly. Positive, confident leaves them with a good feeling.
I like it. It's like ending on a high five instead of just a handshake.
Exactly. And remember, the client experience doesn't end when the meeting ends.
Right. It's about building a relationship.
And that brings us to follow-up.
Okay, so the meeting's over. You've said your goodbyes. Now what? How do you make sure all those good first impressions turn into action?
Well, one of the most important things is to be timely. Don't wait too long to follow up.
How soon is too soon?
It depends, but generally 24 to 48 hours is a good rule of thumb.
Got it. Now, what about what you actually say in the follow-up?
It should always be tailored to the conversation you had, but there are some key elements you should always include. First, thank them for their time and for the opportunity to discuss their needs.
Right. Start with a positive. Reinforce that connection.
Exactly. And then summarize the key points. Any decisions that were made. Next steps.
So it's like a recap, but concise and actionable.
Right. Make it easy for them to remember what you talked about and to see the value you offer. And of course, if there were any outstanding questions or action items, address those as well.
So like if they asked a question you needed to research, you could say, just wanted to follow up on your question about topic. I checked with our team and I can confirm that answer.
Exactly. Shows you're thorough, responsive, committed to providing the right information.
Okay. Gratitude, key takeaways, outstanding questions. What else goes in the follow-up?
If you promise to send any materials like a proposal, presentation, case study, make sure you attach those to your email.
Right. Follow through, deliver on those promises.
Exactly. And finally, always end with a clear call to action. What do you want the client to do next? Schedule a follow-up meeting. Review a proposal. Give feedback.
So you could say, I'd love to schedule a call to discuss your feedback on the proposal. What day and time works best for you?
Perfect. It gives them a clear next step. Keeps the momentum going.
Okay, that's a great template for a follow-up email. But what about other forms of follow-up, like a phone call or even a handwritten note?
Those can be great options too. It really depends on the client, the situation, your relationship with them. For some, a phone call might be more personal. For others, a handwritten note could be a really nice touch.
It's about being thoughtful, considering their preferences.
Exactly. And remember, follow-up isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
So even after that initial email, you should be looking for ways to connect and provide value.
Absolutely. Send them relevant articles, invite them to webinars or events. Just check in periodically, see how they're doing, if there's anything you can help with.
It's about building a genuine relationship, showing you're invested in their success, even if it doesn't lead to an immediate sale.
Exactly. And sometimes those long-term relationships are the ones that pay off the most in the end.
I like that perspective.
Okay.
Okay, so we've covered handling objections and mastering the art of follow-up. Let's recap the key takeaways before we move on.
Good idea. Okay, first remember, objections are opportunities, not roadblocks. Listen actively, acknowledge their concerns, and offer solutions that actually meet their needs.
Right, don't get defensive. Be a problem solver.
And when it comes to follow-up, be timely, be thorough, and be consistent.
and tailor your approach to the client. Whether it's an email, a phone call, or handwritten note, it's about finding what works best for them.
Exactly. And remember, follow-up isn't just about one email. It's about nurturing that relationship and staying top of mind.
Okay, those are great reminders. I feel like I'm leveling up my client meeting skills already. What other insights do our experts have for us?
Well, now that we've covered the core elements of a successful client meeting, I think it's time to get into some of the more subtle but equally important aspects of client interaction.
Ooh, subtle but important. I like it. What are we talking about?
One thing our sources emphasize is the importance of body language.
Body language, I've always heard it's a big part of communication, but I've never really understood how to use it effectively in a business setting.
A lot of people feel that way, but our experts have some really good tips on how to decode body language and use it to your advantage in client meetings.
Okay, I'm ready to learn. Tell me everything.
It's true. A lot of people feel that way. But don't worry. Our experts have some really good tips on how to, decode body language and use it to your advantage when you're meeting with clients.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's dive in.
Okay, well, one of the most important things to remember is that body language is a two-way street. It's not just about how you're presenting yourself, it's also about reading the client's body language and, responding accordingly.
So it's like a dance. You're constantly adjusting to your partner.
Exactly, it's this back and forth. Now, when it comes to your own body language, posture is super important.
Oh, my mom always used to tell me to sit up straight.
She was right. Good posture shows confidence, authority, engagement. You're present, you're alert, you're taking the meeting seriously.
Okay, so no slouching, no crossing my arms.
Right. Those can make you seem disinterested or defensive or even arrogant.
Okay, posture check. What else?
Well, eye contact is crucial, as we've already discussed. It builds rapport, shows you're sincere and listening.
Yeah, but how much eye contact is too much? I don't want to scare the client down.
It's a balance. You want to make eye contact often, but you also need to break it sometimes so you don't seem too intense.
So a few seconds of eye contact, then look away briefly. Then back again.
Right. Find that natural rhythm.
Okay, eye contact check. What else should we be thinking about?
Hand gestures. They can be a great way to emphasize points, show enthusiasm, bring energy to what you're saying.
I talk with my hands a lot. Is that okay in a business setting? I don't want to seem unprofessional.
It's all about balance. You don't want to be, waving your arms around like crazy. But hand gestures used strategically can actually make your message more engaging.
So like if you're talking about a big idea, you spread your hands wide. Or if you're making a crucial point, you use a chopping motion.
Exactly. You're using your hands to support your words. Add some visual interest.
I like it. I'm going to try to be more aware of my hands. Now, what about facial expressions? Those can be tough to control, especially when you're feeling stressed.
It's true. Facial expressions are often involuntary, but they can tell the client a lot about how you're feeling.
So how do I make sure I'm projecting the right emotions?
Well, first you need to be aware of your default facial expression. Do you frown when you're concentrating? Do you have a resting bored face?
Oh man, I think I might have a resting skeptical face.
It happens. But once you know your default expression, you can work on adjusting it.
So if I tend to frown when I'm thinking I should try to smile slightly or raise my eyebrows to show I'm interested.
Exactly. Small adjustments. Big difference.
Okay, facial expressions, check.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about reading the client's body language. What should we be looking for?
Well, eye contact is a big one. If they're making eye contact, they're probably interested in listening.
But what if they're not making eye contact? Does that mean they're bored?
Not always. They could be shy or just processing information, but if they're consistently avoiding eye contact and doing other things like slouching or checking their phone, it might be a sign they're not fully engaged.
Okay, eye contact, check. What else?
Head nods are good. They're following along. They agree with what you're saying.
It's like a silent I'm with you.
Exactly. And if they're leaning forward, that's usually a sign they're interested. They're literally moving closer to the conversation.
Okay, leaning forward. Good. What about leaning back?
That one can be a bit trickier. It could just mean they're comfortable. But if they're leaning back with their arms crossed or frowning, it could mean they're skeptical.
So you have to look at the whole picture, not just one gesture.
Right. It's all about the context.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Now what about mirroring? I've heard that can help build rapport.
It can. Subtly mirroring their body language, tone of voice, even energy level can create a sense of connection.
But not like I'm copying them exactly. Right.
No, it should be subtle and genuine,
Yeah.
not robotic.
Okay, subtle mirroring check. Anything else on body language?
Just remember, it's just one piece of the puzzle. You need to consider their words, tone of voice, overall demeanor to really understand what they're communicating.
That's like a whole language in itself. I'm starting to get it.
That's great. Now let's move on to another subtle but powerful aspect of communication.
Tonality.
Tonality. You mean like how we use our voices? Exactly. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it. The pitch, the pace, the volume, the inflection.
Wow, I never really thought about that. I guess I've always just focused on the content of what I'm saying, not so much the delivery.
It's a common thing. But our experts say tonality can make a huge difference, especially when you're trying to build rapport and credibility.
So how do we use tonality effectively?
Let's start with pitch. Varying your pitch makes you sound more interesting, more dynamic. Speaking in a monotone can be really boring. But raising your pitch for an important point or lowering it to create intimacy, that can add a lot of depth to your message.
So it's like adding punctuation to your speech.
Right. You're highlighting certain words, creating a more engaging experience for the listener.
Okay, pitch check. What about pace? I tend to talk really fast when I'm nervous.
That's common, but try to be mindful of your pace. Slowing down gives the client time to process what you're saying. It also makes you sound more calm and confident.
But not too slow, right?
No, you don't want to sound like you're falling asleep. It's about finding that sweet spot. Clear, concise, but not rushed.
Pace check. What about volume? I've always been told to project my voice, but sometimes I feel like I'm shouting.
Volume is tricky. You want to be heard, but not overbearing. Adjust your volume based on the size of the room or the number of people on the call.
So quieter for a small meeting.
Yeah.
Louder for a big presentation.
Right. And with virtual meetings, you have to be extra careful because microphones can distort your voice.
Okay, volume check. Now what about inflection? I'm not sure I understand what that means.
Inflection is all about the emphasis you put on certain words. It's how you use your voice to show emotion, meaning nuance. For example, if you say, "I'm so excited about this project," in a flat monotone voice, it doesn't sound very exciting. But if you emphasize "so" and "excited," it conveys much more genuine enthusiasm.
So it's like adding exclamation points with your voice.
Exactly, you're bringing your words to life, making them more engaging.
Okay, inflection check. I think I'm starting to get the hang of this tonality thing. Now let's talk about listening. I know it's important to listen to the client, but are there specific techniques for doing it well in a meeting?
Absolutely. Active listening is so crucial, especially when you're trying to build that rapport, understand their needs, and create that sense of partnership.
So what exactly is active listening?
Well, first of all, it's about paying attention. It sounds simple, but it's easy to get distracted. Put your phone away. Close your laptop. Focus on the client.
Be present. Be in the moment.
Right. And it's not just about hearing the words, it's about understanding what's behind them. Pay attention to their tone of voice, body language, facial expressions. You're trying to get a sense of their emotional state and their real message.
So if a client says, "I'm interested in learning more," but their tone is flat and their body language is closed off, it might mean they're not really that interested.
Exactly. Active listening is about reading between the lines, picking up on those subtle cues.
Okay, so pay attention, look for the deeper meaning. What else?
Ask clarifying questions.
Oh, I always struggle with that. I'm afraid of sounding dumb or interrupting.
I get it. But asking clarifying questions actually shows you're listening, you're engaged, you want to understand their needs.
So what kind of questions should I ask?
Things like, "Could you elaborate on that?" Or "Can you give me an example?" Or "What are your thoughts on that?"
Okay, those are good. And it helps keep the conversation moving in the right direction.
Exactly. It's about being an active participant, making sure you're both on the same page.
Clarifying questions, check. What else is part of active listening?
Summarizing and paraphrasing.
Oh, right. It shows them you're listening and you get what they're saying.
Exactly. You can say, "So if I understand correctly, your main concern is the issue." Or, "It sounds like you're looking for a solution that the benefit."
And it helps clear up any misunderstandings.
Right. It keeps things on track.
Summarizing and paraphrasing. Check. What else?
Validation.
Validation. What do you mean?
It's about acknowledging their feelings and perspectives, even if you don't agree. You can say, "I understand how frustrating that must be," or "It sounds like you're facing a real challenge," or "I appreciate you sharing your thoughts."
That's powerful. It shows you're empathetic, you care about their experience, you're on their team.
It's about creating that safe space for open communication, building trust.
Even when you might not see eye to eye.
Exactly. Now let's quickly recap the key elements of active listening.
Love a good recap, especially after covering so much ground.
First, pay attention. Eliminate distractions. Focus on the client.
Be present.
Be here now.
Right, then listen for that deeper meaning. Pay attention to their tone, their body language, all of it.
Read between the lines.
And ask those clarifying questions. Show you're engaged and you want to understand them.
Clarifying questions essential.
Then summarize and paraphrase. Make sure you're both on the same page.
Got it.
And finally, validate their feelings. Show them you're listening and you care.
Okay. I feel like I'm becoming a master listener.
Practice makes perfect. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
Okay, so we've talked about body language, tonality, and active listening. What else is in our expert toolkit?
Well, another thing they emphasized is building rapport.
Rapport? I don't know. It sounds kind of fluffy. Isn't it more important to focus on like the data and the facts? Those are important, of course. But our experts say building rapport is essential for a strong client relationship. It lays the foundation.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more about rapport.
It's about creating that connection, trust, mutual understanding. You're finding common ground, building that sense of shared purpose, making the client feel like you're on their side.
Okay, I get that. But how do you actually do it? It's not like you can just snap your fingers and suddenly have rapport.
You're right, it takes effort. But there are some simple things you can do to build rapport in a client meeting. And one of the most effective is to find common ground.
Like what?
It could be a shared interest,
Yeah.
a similar background, even just a mutual love of coffee. You're looking for those points of connection.
So a little bit of small talk at the beginning is okay.
Small talk can be great. It's not about wasting time. It's about building that bridge.
Okay, so common ground bridge. What else?
Active listening, which we already talked about. When you really listen to the client, it shows you respect them, you value their perspective, you're there to help them.
It builds trust.
Exactly. And trust is the foundation of rapport.
Okay, find common ground, active listening. What else?
Mirroring, which we talked about earlier.
Right, subtle mirroring to create that sense of connection.
Exactly, like you're speaking the same language.
But not too obvious, right? I don't want to seem like I'm mocking them.
Absolutely. It should be subtle and natural.
Okay, got it. Subtle mirroring check. What else?
Be genuinely curious about the client, about their business, their goals. Ask thoughtful questions. Listen carefully. Show that you're invested in their success.
So it's not just about selling your services. It's about being a partner, a trusted advisor.
Exactly. When you genuinely care about their success, they can feel it. And that goes a long way in building rapport.
Okay, be curious, be authentic. What else?
And don't underestimate the power of humor. A well-placed joke or a shared laugh can really break the ice, make the client feel more comfortable.
But appropriate humor.
Of course.
Mm.
Always be mindful of the client's personality and cultural background. What's funny to one person might be offensive to another.
Humor check. Use it wisely.
Yeah.
So I think I'm starting to get this rapport thing.
Great. Let's do a quick recap to make sure you've got all the key elements.
Let's recap away.
First, find that common ground. Look for those shared interest experiences, things you can connect on.
Build that bridge.
Then be an active listener. Show them you're present, you care, you're there to help.
Active listening check. It's more than just hearing the words.
Then use mirroring subtly and authentically.
Subtle mirroring check.
Be genuinely curious. Ask questions, listen, show that you're invested in their success.
Be a partner, not just a salesperson.
And don't forget humor. When appropriate, it can be a great way to build rapport.
Okay, I'm feeling much more confident about building rapport now. What a great toolkit.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah.
What's the parting wisdom?
Remember, all these techniques, strategies are great, but the most important thing is to be yourself.
Oh, that's so important. I think sometimes we get so caught up in trying to do everything perfectly that we forget to just be authentic.
Exactly. Clients can tell when you're being fake, and that can actually hurt the relationship. But when you're genuine, when you're true to yourself, that creates a connection that can't be faked.
So be prepared, be strategic, but most importantly, be yourself.
Exactly. And remember, building strong client relationships is a journey. It's about constantly learning, growing, adapting.
Well said. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the art of client meeting mastery. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and tools that you can use in your own interactions.
And remember, even the most experienced professionals are always learning. So keep experimenting, keep practicing, and keep striving to create those meaningful connections that lead to lasting success.
Until next time, keep diving deep.